Hello, welcome to Dr. Jeff Talks About Sex and Intimacy, the podcast where we explore the real, raw, and relevant aspects of sexual health, relationships, and everything in between. Thank you for joining live today or on the recording. This is episode 31, Untangling the Mind, Anxiety, Intimacy, and Sex. I want to take a moment just to sincerely thank you for being here. Your presence here, it's everything. You are the reason that the podcast exists. I'm truly grateful for each of you who tunes in. And we are out there on social media. So whatever you're on, Facebook, YouTube, X, LinkedIn, Kik, we're there. We're there with you. If you're on X and you have a question, go to YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Kik, or StreamYard to allow yourself to send questions to us. If you happen to be a Facebook person, please follow us. The more people that follow us, the more things we can do on Facebook, and we appreciate your following. Go to the website. The website contains all of the wonderful podcasts that we've done with my amazing guests that have shared their expertise, and you can watch any of those right on the website. In addition, you can pull up the calendar and see all the exciting things we have coming up. We have all kinds of things planned all the way through October already. Great guests and great episodes. So please go to the website. Listen to us. I don't know where you are when you're on the treadmill, when you're on the elliptical, when you're in your car, wherever you are. We're on your favorite music streaming service like Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio. We're there with you. So bring us along and listen to us while you move along. Learn more about sex and intimacy. I just want to remind you, as I do at each episode, that everyone is welcome here, regardless of your sexual orientation, your gender identity, or your relationship style. Everybody is so welcome here. So thank you for being here. The goal of the podcast is pretty simple. It's basically to empower and enlighten you with scientific evidence-based information you can rely on to improve your sexual health and deepen your relationships, helping you to live and love more fully. In this episode, well, we're going to be diving into a topic that affects pretty much everyone, yet it's often hard to talk about: anxiety. We all have it at times. We will specifically be looking at anxiety's impact on sex and intimacy, whether it's performance anxiety about sex, fear of rejection, or emotional disconnection. Anxiety can create real barriers to connection and pleasure, which is so key and essential to sex and intimacy. Joining me today is Alycia Williams, and she comes back. She so graciously joined us on a previous episode, and I'm so excited to have her back. She is a licensed professional counselor and an AASECT certified sex therapist, specializing in the intersection of mental health, sexuality, and relationships. She has a private practice based in Oklahoma, and Alycia works with individuals and couples navigating anxiety, trauma, desire discrepancies, and sexual identity development. She's passionate about helping people reconnect with their authentic selves. We have a wonderful podcast coming up in September on connecting with your authentic self and reclaiming intimacy in ways that feel safe, that feels empowering and affirming. Alycia brings a sex-positive, trauma-informed, and culturally responsive lens to her work. She's a sought-after speaker, educator, and clinician in the field of sex therapy, and I could not be happier to welcome her back. Thank you so much for joining me once again, Alycia.
Hi, Jeff. It's so good to see you tonight. I'm glad to be here and have this important conversation with you.
This is such a great subject, and I was so excited when you came up with this topic. I picked your brain a little, and you came up with some awesome ideas, and I'm really excited about this one. So let's jump in and dive into it.
Sounds great. I think it's so important, like you said, for us to recognize that anxiety is something that impacts almost every person on some level at some point. Statistically, something like 1 in 3 adults will have a diagnosable level of anxiety at some point in their adult life. And that could be kind of a chronic or organic anxiety experience, or it could be acute or situational type of anxiety. But our opportunity to talk about how sex and anxiety particularly go together, I think is really important, because a lot of people don't make the connection when they're having intimacy or sexual difficulties, that there may be some kind of anxiety process that's happening that's impacting that experience.
Definitely.
So, one of the things that I want to start with is recognizing that sex and sexuality are a physical and a mental experience. And interestingly, anxiety is also a physical and a mental experience, right? It is something that is happening in the body and also in our thoughts, in our feelings. And so, for all of us to try and figure out how to isolate one from the other, as opposed to being able to be in an experience where we recognize that there's an important interplay, allows us to be more targeted, more kind of open to all of the things that might be going on sexually for us or emotionally, instead of saying, well, it can't be anxiety because I've never had a trauma around sex, or because I don't have an anxiety disorder. So if we think about the ways that our nervous system might react when we're feeling anxious, we can recognize that it can impact our breathing, our muscle tension. It can impact our cognitions. I often ask people to think about the kind of nervous system and what we know about the fight or flight process, that we have the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system, right? And the parasympathetic nervous system is what we sometimes refer to as the rest and digest. It is when we're feeling relaxed. I sometimes say to people, this is the body knows how to do what the body wants to do. And so when we're feeling calm and relaxed, when we're not feeling under threat, the body can respond and function in the ways that it needs to. But when we start to feel anxious, we notice that we're moving into the sympathetic nervous system process, right? We sort of move back into the primitive part of the brain. And that is where we might be getting some kind of physiological response to a thought process. This is where we might experience sexual pain, where we might experience performance issues, where we might have erectile dysfunctions or disappointments, as they say, erectile disappointments, where we might have some variability in those sexual response systems, even if it's an experience that we think we might want, because the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest, the natural sort of movement of energy and relaxation can get hijacked by that threatened place that we can go to when we're feeling anxious. We can see here that some of the consequences of that can be that it can lead us to become avoidant about sexuality, to shut down, to become hypervigilant, right? Obviously, when we're in an anxious state, we're going to be guarded. We're going to be paying a lot of attention to kind of all of the cues in the environment. And so we might become, I work with lots of people who talk about, even if their partner wants to lean in for a hug, or they ask them how their day is, or they want to come and sit close to them on the sofa, they find themselves going into kind of an anxious or vigilant state, because they immediately start to associate that kind of platonic or what should feel safe and comfortable touch with something that might feel a little bit more pressured. So you might have some experience with that, Jeff, with some of your clients, with some of your patients.
I do. And I was just thinking when you were talking exactly about that. So many of my men If you've had a problem in the past with erections, it erodes confidence. It makes you worry about those erections. So what happens is men get started. They're like, okay, everything's going okay. And they start getting anxious. This is where I usually lose it. Am I going to lose it?
Right,
And
right.
and that anxiety, as you said, it's a part of fight or flight. So anxiety produces adrenaline, and adrenaline's part of fight or flight. And so the erection starts to subside and go away because blood's moving to the brain, into the muscles and things. So many of my men find that, especially with that past history, if they're worried now about getting and keeping those erections, so the anxiety creeps in, and of course, I tell them, I understand. You don't even have to look down; it's going away. They're like, yes, that's exactly what's happening.
Right. That is the calm, relaxed state sexual functioning versus the anxious, hypervigilant state of sexual functioning, right?
Right.
That it's not that we're not noticing what's going on in our body when we're in a calm state, but we're not trying to control it and we're not panicking about what may be happening. In the
Mhm.
anxious state, we sometimes you may have heard this term spectatoring, where we kind of come outside of our body and we start to watch. I sometimes describe it to my clients as, if you're at a football game and you're watching the players on the field and you're telling them to run faster, right? Or score that touchdown, they can't hear you and they're not responding to what, like, you really don't have any control over what's going on, but you're watching it and you're anxious to want to control the experience. And a similar thing can happen, particularly with men and erectile functioning, when we move into that hypervigilant state. I sometimes say anxiety begets anxiety, right? And
Yeah,
so even if you're not yet anxious, the anxiety that you may become anxious can lead to that kind of process. And that can happen for both partners. Sometimes the anxiety is about our own experience. Sometimes it might be about our partners. Is our partner going to lose their arousal? Is our partner going to experience pain? Is our partner going to be able to have a pleasurable, right, experience?
Mhm, mhm.
I like to remind people that sexual arousal is arousal, and so is anxiety. Anxiety is also arousal, it is nervous system arousal. And some of the solutions, and this may be, we were talking about sort of the performance, that we need to create some safety in our ability to show up sexually. So if we're aroused, but we're aroused in a fear state, that's going to counteract the sexual arousal piece, the access to pleasure, right, to embodiment, to presence. And to your point, right, that adrenaline is enough to really kind of put a cold cold bucket of water over the whole experience. And so what
Definitely.
I tell people is, if you can imagine it like a pendulum, you don't go straight from fear-based arousal into pleasure arousal. So some of the strategies are to start to imagine moving into a neutral place where you feel calm, where you feel
Mhm,
relaxed, where you're noticing the arousal, but it's in an anxious or fearful or controlled kind of arena, and you're wanting to move into a place that's feeling more calm and relaxed. Again, that might move out of the bedroom and into a place like interactions with conversation, right? Interactions with sitting on the sofa together, interactions with making dinner, and we can be around each other and not be vigilant, not be preoccupied, not be fearful. And then we move from a neutral place into pleasure arousal, because I think a lot of people try and push through from a fear-based state, and
mm,
they wind up making the problem even more entrenched, even more anxious.
mhm. Yep, definitely. Absolutely. Too, I like how you talked about the spectator, because with my clients too, I tell my patients, I say, it's not the Olympics. You are not an Olympic judge. You are not rating with your 10,
Right.
8, you know, you're not present if you're judging. Even they'll say, well, it used to feel this way. How do you even know how it used to feel? Your memory's only so good. And if you're comparing, you're missing the present moment of what it feels like right now, right here, in this miraculous experience you're having with your partner right now, who wants you present.
Yes, absolutely. Um, you know, I think that that's exactly right. And We'll get into that in a minute, but some of the strategies for combating anxiety is really learning how to cultivate a sense of presence, a slowing down. What I find with a lot of people that I work with is that the more inaccessible sex becomes to them, the less reliable, the more pressured they feel around it, whether it's their own experience or their partner's experience, the more likely they are to have kind of a rapid, what I what I sometimes describe as like a stripped down version of sex. So we take all of the good parts that might allow us to feel connected and to build arousal and to really be in the experience. We sort of strip that all away and we go straight for the central act of sex.
Mm.
Whichever kind of partnership you're in, whatever that might look like, but it's definitely very genital focused and tends to be pretty outcome focused, right? So get the
Mhm.
genitals to whatever state we need them to be in to try and get them to a state of orgasm, right? Or completion as
Right.
quickly as possible. And what that does is it creates even more anxiety. It becomes this frenetic, kind of driven experience without a lot of the ease and resilience that comes from slowing down and being present and being able to notice those thoughts come in and then kind of let them wander back out. Instead, it's just like, someone shot the starter pistol and you're just racing towards the finish line for all you can, all you can give it.
And like you said too, and then the safety piece really comes in. Do you feel safe? Do you feel worthy of love and belonging? Can you relax into this situation? And that may take work. Maybe like some of my patients, some of the listeners out there have previous trauma, and a certain gesture triggers that trauma. And they forget that you're in a safe space with a loving partner because they're triggered by their previous sexual trauma. And that can be really challenging. So, of course, feeling safe and having safety, a big part of the sexual experience with consent and working together is so, so important. It's foundational and fundamental.
I think you're exactly right. And that might be where some of the differentiation comes in. You kind of the triage or the diagnostic process about what is the root of this. Is it some clinical anxiety? You're a person that tends to be anxious. You have anxious anxiety about a lot of things, anxious thoughts or, behaviors around a lot of things. And this is just another thing. Is it something about your own history or experience? Do you have a history of pain or sexual trauma, fertility issues? There are a lot of things that can happen in there. Religious, trauma for some people can create kind of particularly focused on sex anxiety. So people will say to me, I'm not anxious in general, but I find myself really preoccupied or hypervigilant around this. And
Mm.
then the third thing that we might be evaluating for is, are there just relational concerns that are making us anxious? I don't feel safe with this person. And obviously, that can be anything from the extreme of interpersonal, interpartner, domestic violence type situation, trauma in that way. It can also be we're not feeling close. There's been betrayal. We aren't communicating well. We're not spending time together. So we're trying to figure out as we're evaluating what's going on. I recognize that I'm not feeling relaxed. I'm not feeling connected to my body. I'm feeling kind of worried and nervous about what's going to happen intimately. And maybe I need to do a little bit of investigating about where that's coming from, because that can really make the difference on how we're responding to it.
Yeah, so true. I remember a patient so beautifully put it to me once and said to her partner when we were doing some work and said to him, when I feel like you don't have my back and I can't trust you, why would I let you into my secret garden?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a deeply vulnerable and intimate experience to be
Mm.
sexual with someone. And, as this slide shows, anxiety can create a feeling of being vulnerable. Vulnerability can create a feeling of being anxious. Like there's this interplay, we know that you can take a human being and meet all of its basic needs, food, shelter, right?
Mm,
And if you do not touch and nurture and make eye contact, right, give love and belonging to that infant, it will have failure to thrive. Human beings actually are dependent. The world started out as a brutal place, right? Now we have shoe stores and indoor plumbing, and right, handheld computers. Like we have lots of things that make the world feel a little bit less safe, but we all have the evolutionary roots of a deep need for community and belonging as a way of surviving the world.
mm,
Um, and as such, we all have a primitive fear of being rejected.
mm, definitely.
And in sexuality, when you're exposing the most intimate, most vulnerable, literally most naked and exposed parts of yourself to someone else, of course, that can bring up vulnerability. And so
Mm,
sometimes I work with people who have some anxiety because they're trying so hard to be in control that they don't want to experience any vulnerability,
mhm,
don't want to let go of control. They might have compulsive sexuality, but they don't really connect to the experience. They might have avoidant sexuality or rigid rules or expectations around sexuality as a way of navigating that fear of being vulnerable, being exposed,
mm,
right? Um,
definitely.
and so sometimes I work with people who are coming to me saying, I'm having regular sex, but I'm not enjoying it. It
Mm,
feels dutiful, it feels
mm,
obligatory. And
mhm,
I have such fear
mm,
about either A, losing the relationship, if I'm more honest, right, about this kind of sexual experience I'm having,
mm,
or I'm afraid of, being rejected or harmed in some way if I expose more of my wants and needs. And so they make this bargain that they'll have this kind of disembodied or performative sexuality as an alternative to intimacy.
mm, definitely. That's such a great point. So many things, and I think about Brene Brown's work and how she says sex is one of the most vulnerable acts. You feel very exposed and very vulnerable. So I think it definitely vulnerability comes into play, but vulnerability is the path to love and creativity. So there's not another way to get there, unfortunately.
Sure. And, I come from a deeply held philosophy that vulnerability, authenticity, um, it is kind of a birthright. It is something that we should all value for ourselves, not just so that we can be better lovers or more attractive, right? Or perform longer or better for someone else, but because as a person, you deserve to feel like you can be accepted for the fullness of who you are, right? And that work can be difficult for some people to get to. I can certainly appreciate that. Um, and so, what I often find is that people will come in, and particularly partners will come in, talking about some of their disappointments and recognize that they're both sharing this same experience, which is we're really not meeting each other,
Mm,
right?
mhm,
And one person will, this is a common script that happens. One person will say, they could go the rest of their life without ever having sex. It doesn't matter to them. They don't care about it, right? And the other partner will say, all they want is sex every time they get near me, right? They're trying to get in my pants. And that's all they want to do. And when we start to break it down, the reality is we're not generally that far apart. We just have covered our feelings of vulnerability about not being able to meet each other
mm,
by kind of holding those rigid rules, right? So I'm going to be the person that controls sex and kind of withholds it, and you're going to be the person that obsessively pursues it. And neither one of us is really going to feel, kind of like you said, that we can stop spectating and like really show up in our bodies for each other.
mm. And I think about my patients with prostate cancer. It was so hard, this one woman, because I think that changed their roles so much. Because he was like, you know, I'm so glad I'm cancer free, and it's not that important to me. And she's like, but it's really important to me. And I think for her too, it was this is part of how we communicate. This is part of our scripts with each other.
Sure.
And I'm really having a hard time struggling with it. She was struggling so much more than he was, but they had that whole thing where he was like, it's not a big deal to me. And he goes, she says, but we have a problem because it is a big deal to me. So, what you're saying, I think it really resonates, but that vulnerability, that being able to show up, to be really seen and valued by that other person and not judged. And all that's so important during the intimate experience.
Right. Right. I think that that's exactly right. And I often see people, I see people across the lifespan, young people who've decided to wait until they're married to be sexual, people who did wait and got married and found out it wasn't always, cracked up to be, people who really long for and miss kind of the easy, early, vibrant days of sexuality and are struggling a little bit with a more routine kind of relational life or small kids, right? The demands of home and career and all of that. But one of the things I actually see fairly frequently is people, for whatever reason, have lost access to the kind of sex that they were accustomed to being accessible to. And kind of like you were saying, if someone goes through a cancer experience or an injury or, a chronic illness, or they have some kind of a grief or a loss, the kind of sex that they were accustomed to being able to have may not be accessible to them. And that can kick them into anxiety. Am I desirable to you anymore? Right? Are you still going to love me if I can't please you in the same way? If we don't do sex in the, kind of the choreography that we are accustomed to, it feels kind of embarrassing or awkward. I've worked with people and they're like, we've been together for 30 years and we go to touch each other and it feels like we don't know each other anymore because we're trying to rediscover. And so I tell the young people that I work with, start practicing being embodied and being communicative and being creative now, because if your sex life is a one-trick pony, like on demand, a particular script over and over again, if that ever shifts, and our bodies break down, so it does shift for all of us, you're really going to grieve and panic a little bit when that doesn't work the same way for you, right?
Yep.
So this brings us maybe to some of the strategies that I use with people. I have a saying that I tell my clients all the time in my office, which is presence over performance, that we want to be present. Are you present? Asking yourself, checking in when you're imagining being intimate, when your partner is coming close to you or making moves, when you're thinking about touching yourself. Am I here? Am I in my body? Am I noticing what's happening? Or am I somewhere else? Am I thinking about performance or being judged? Or so some somatic grounding techniques, one of the best ways that we can get out of that kind of sympathetic, parasympathetic war, right? Nervous system war that we get into is focusing on senses and sensory experience. So I say to people, if you're feeling really anxious about your genitals, move to a sexual position or experience where the focus maybe isn't on them, so that we're taking the focus and shifting it a little bit. Smell your partner's hair, run your hand down their body and notice the temperature, right? Or the feeling of smoothness or muscle or right? Feel the sheets under your body. Bring yourself to a sense of awareness, which can ground you and kind of pull your brain out of that hijacked place of being hyper vigilant. I have some mindfulness practices that I do with people, and I encourage them to do them outside of intimate experiences. I like a metaphor, and so I sometimes say to my clients, I'm a big fan of what I call the Jenga version of therapy, change in general, not just therapy, which is when you play Jenga, you don't take the bottom piece of wood off of the bottom of the stack as your first move, right, and topple the whole tower. You look for the easy moves. You look for this, right, the accessible pieces, and you practice and you get the feeling of the game. And then as you move in, you start making more and more complex moves. So I encourage people to start practicing mindfulness, grounding, checking in with your body, doing some deep breathing. Not when you're in the midst of an anxious sexual situation, but when you're just in your car, when you're at your desk, when you're, getting in bed at night, so that you can start to have access to what those experiences feel like. I encourage people, if it's in their realm of comfort and accessibility, to do some solo exploration, to imagine what your sexual preferences might be, how it feels to be in your body without having to perform for anybody else. For people who are accustomed to using external stimuli, erotic material or other kinds of things, when we're dealing with some performance issues or some sexual anxiety, we'll often encourage them to try and have some experiences without that, not in a shaming way. If they're having problems and that's one of their concerns with a compulsive behavior, then we'll talk about that. But if we're just talking about wanting to be in your body, there is a way to kind of pull your focus away from external stimuli and be able to go into your mind's eye and turn into your own body, your own breath, your own sensations. So I will encourage people to do that. We talked earlier about, is the relationship the problem, right? Is personal anxiety the problem? What's the intersection there? If one of you has a problem, to your point earlier, we both have a problem. So I encourage people to talk about how we can stop and pause, how we can slow down if somebody's feeling anxious, how we can communicate, how we can co-regulate with breath or with eye contact, right? Shifting positions, how we can manage our expectations and our responses if our partner's having a hard time, so that it doesn't turn into a catastrophic event. If somebody's brain gets hijacked by anxiety, it just feels like, I think about sex and arousal all the time, like waves in the ocean, right?
Mhm.
The tide rolls in, the tide rolls out. If you've ever been to see the ocean, when the tide rolls out, you don't go, oh my God, the ocean's gone forever. You just know it's going to come back, right? Because that's what the ocean does. And I say, your arousal is going to ebb and flow. Your erections or your pleasure is going to ebb and flow. Your focus might even ebb and flow. And that's okay. If we're not panicking about it, we can be in that gentle place with ourselves and each other. And then we'll talk about some communication skills. When this happens, how do we talk about it, right? Can we use language that feels welcoming and gentle, clear, not judgmental, right? Not provocative, so that we encourage a sense of connection as we're trying to work through these issues. That was a lot, but those are sort of some of the therapeutic tools and strategies that I will use for people when they're trying to manage some anxiety.
Definitely. And, similarly, like you said, I do too. And I tell them, just like your mind can stray off of sex onto judging and things like that, you can redirect it back to sex. You
Yeah.
just get back to something, something sexual in your mind again. What's happening? You can anchor to. A lot of times I'll tell them, anchor to the feeling, to the emotion, what turns you on, anchor to that part of the sex rather than letting your mind move over to judgment, sideline. Don't stay sideline, stay in it. So, very much like you talked about, and I think it can be very effective. I always tell them, they'll say this, it's easy to take the medication you gave me and to do the things you said. The more difficult thing is to keep my mind on the right things and not
Right.
judge myself. And I
Right.
say, this is the hardest work. It's really, really difficult work,
Right.
but it really matters. And all the men sort of that have those struggles, they resonate with that. It's like, gosh, yeah, my mind goes to the wrong place
Right.
and it's disastrous. And
And what we know from many, 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 many cases is that for example, if you're taking a PD5, a Viagra, Cialis, and what your patient has is a vascular issue, right? A blood flow issue, the medication is likely to do a pretty good job of helping with that. If we're having a performance anxiety, if we're having a trauma that's coming up, I've worked with so many men in particular who come in and say, the drugs don't work for me.
Mhm.
And almost exclusively those men will tell me they get spontaneous erections. They get erections sufficient
Mhm.
for masturbation. What they're having is, again, going back to we need each other. When they're in a partnered experience, the burst of adrenaline, right? The self-monitoring, the vigilance, and this is for men and for women, can shut down the sexual response system.
Mhm.
even if we have some other things trying to help us along. So lubrication, vibrators, right? Medications, we've got sex toys, we've got all these other things. Anxiety is actually powerful enough to override those other things. And just having me say that to people helps them feel so normal.
Mhm.
It helps them feel like, "Oh, I'm not broken. This is a solvable problem," and I think that's so reassuring to be able to meet each other from a place to say, "Sure, of course it's an anxious producing situation." And our job is to just be gentle with ourselves so the anxiety signals can kind of calm down and go back right into the background, that we just reassure ourselves that we're not in danger, that we don't need to be on red alert, right?
Yes, it does, and the words you use, the exact words I was thinking. It overrides, it hijacks the situation. Anxiety, even though you took your pill, you did whatever you were going to do, it takes over. But you can also take it back, and you can take back your control. And so I think that's just really important for them to remember, that just like you can go the wrong direction, you can come back to a better direction. And so getting their mind in the right place. And then I say to them too, you've been with this partner for 20 years. They know about this. And okay, every time you get an erection, because they're getting those spontaneous erections, I tell them, look down, look at your penis. It's
Mhm.
literally looking you in the face saying, seriously, we do
Right,
not have a problem.
right,
Let it build back your confidence when those things happen. But then I know you feel like, gosh, but when I need it, it's not there, but it can be there. And the other thing is, what's so disastrous when it's not there? That creates the mystery of, if I'm hard enough, I have intercourse. If I'm not hard enough, I have intercourse. If I'm uncomfortable and I don't feel like I'm lubricating enough as a woman, we have outer course. Let's be creative and have fun with oral stimulation, manual stimulation, whatever.
mhm.
It's supposed to be fun. I just remind them over and over. This is a pleasurable, wonderful gift
Sure,
of an experience. Let's not turn it into, oh my gosh, he took his pill. My blood pressure is already going up. That's not pleasure. So I think saying, let's make sure that we both get this intimate, wonderful, connected experience. We can have an orgasm, whether we're hard or not, whether we're wet enough or not, whether whatever is happening, all of this is possible. Don't make those things like hardness dictate your love play and your relationship.
right,
It's just a piece of it. Roll
sure,
with it. Not easier said than done. And I tell them
right,
that too. I say, I know this is really easy for me to say sitting here, and
right.
it's more difficult for you to do. But when you engage that, when you do that, it changes everything.
Yes, and I think that's exactly right, that, we give permission, we open up the door for a conversation about, sex that's not just focused on penetration, for example, or ejaculation or orgasm. Um, it's also important to recognize that, people with penises with external genitalia, right? There's a different kind of focus on the performance. That what we know from Emily Nagoski's work, that male identified people much more likely to experience spontaneous desire, whereas female identified people are much more likely in general to experience responsive desire. And anxiety is absolutely something that can disrupt the desire, the arousal process. And so for men, this is not all men and all women or all people with penises or vulvas are not all the same. But when you think about, if your issue is that you have the longing to be sexual, but your body is not cooperating, or you're having a hard time performing, you're having pain, you're
Mhm.
having lack
Mhm.
of response, right? Then that's one thing. If what you're having is anxiety about the idea of sex in general, it's embarrassing, it's shameful, it's uninteresting to you, you can't imagine that the experience you're going to have is a pleasurable one, or that the anxiety comes from, like we talked about earlier, a sense of obligation, a sense, an experience of trauma. Those might be different things. And so we can't always rely on our capacity to just tell people this is a pleasurable experience, so of course you're going to want it. We might say, again, the path to creating safety for some people, that sense of regulation, nervous system regulation, embodiment, that might be a more robust process for some people than it is
Mhm.
for others. And that's okay.
Mm.
That's the thing that I say to people is, um, your goal, my goal for you is not to get you to have X kind of sex or sex with a particular kind of frequency or with a particular kind of partner. My goal is to help you be open to what the experience can look like for you and what are the barriers that get in the way of that for you.
Mm.
Because I think that that's really validating, uh, for a lot of people. They might say, why should I want sex? Or why should I treat this anxiety? Because their partner will be saying, yeah, you're anxious, take an anxiety pill so we can have sex.
Mhm.
Instead of saying, I really want you to feel safe and comfortable in your
Mm.
body and safe with me and right and grounded. And then let's see what can be built in our relationship from that place.
Mhm.
And this is kind of the last of what I wanted to say, which is just recognizing that anxiety and intimacy, sexuality, I often imagine like um, a magnet, a strong magnet, and you put it on the table, and anything metal just sort of is attracted to it and wants to connect right to it. I'm like, there is something about anxiety and sex that just pull to each other, right?
Mm.
Because of the vulnerability and the longing to be accepted. I mean, even if you just think about the primary kind of human function is to get our genetic material into the next generation. Like that is the essential survivalist behavior. Not all people choose to have children, but we are wired, right, to try and do that to survive as a species. And so when that process gets disrupted, it can create some anxiety for people. And to just recognize that anxiety, the vulnerability, the exposure, the longing to be accepted and cared for, it's so deeply human, and
Mm.
our job as helpers, right, as medical providers, as mental health providers, is to sit with people and reassure them that lots of parts of life feel tricky. The human experience is a little bit messy and scary, and we could also navigate through it together.
Mhm. Excellent, excellent, excellent. And we all, I think too, that normalizing thing about we all have our brokenness. We all have our challenges and our difficulties. But as some of the great people before us have said in songs and words, the light comes in through our brokenness. It sometimes shines the truest light into our world for healing and moving forward. So I think normalizing is such a big deal. I've got a couple questions that came through
Sure.
that I think are pretty good. So let's see what we got. The first one is I get stuck in my head during sex, overthinking, worrying about performance. So what are some of the first steps I can take to reconnect with my body and partner?
Mhm. So, such a great question. And, I always start with whatever narrative, whatever, like those little cartoons that have the little angel and the devil on your shoulder. I'm like, that little devil tells you that the worst thing that can happen is if you fail sexually in this moment, right? It's going to be
Mhm.
humiliating. You're going to disappoint somebody. You're going to disappoint yourself. And instead, if you just let that, that other little voice, that gentler voice say, what's the rush?
Mm.
What's the rush? Slow down, take a deep breath, right? Again, focus on some sensation. So I'm feeling a little bit anxious about what's happening in my body or my genitals in particular, but I could kiss my partner. I could massage them. I could smell their skin or, their neck or their hair. they could touch my body in ways that weren't focused on genital performance, right? I could touch their body and sort of take the pressure off of me for a minute. So that's generally where I start. What you said to some of your patients about look down, right? You see some genital response. Obviously, people with vulvas, that's not the exact same experience, but recognizing that your body is still going to keep showing up and responding. It just may not do it on demand like you would like. So what you're really suffering from is a feeling of not being in control rather than not being able to experience pleasure. And when you make that shift, you go, oh, I'm fine. My expectation just isn't being met in this moment, and I can handle that, right? I can
Mhm.
focus on something that maybe I do have some control over right now until my nervous system kind of calms back down.
Yeah, yeah, and getting into that moment, into that presence, and even sometimes I say, "Are you breathing?" When you
Mhm.
start to get anxious, are you breathing? Breathe into it. Breathe into the sex. Breathe into the intimacy a little bit.
Mhm.
Yeah, I thought that was a good question. Great answer too. Next question was, how can I support my partner who experience anxiety that's affecting our intimacy?
Um, Anxiety, I often tell people that anxiety is an invitation to control the world so that you don't have to feel out of control. And
Mm,
so any person with anxiety knows that we will plan 10 steps ahead and that we will try and predict what everything means and what might happen as a way of not having um, kind of an unexpected or an out of control experience. And sometimes that can be frustrating for a non anxious partner. They see somebody doing a lot of rituals or having a lot of rigid rules or, not being super flexible or open around things that make them feel anxious. And so without enabling the anxiety, because if we keep moving the goalpost too much, I think it just winds up sort of swallowing you whole. But having some compassion for it, just acknowledging it. I know it seems like you might be feeling anxious right now, or would you like it if we slowed down a minute?
mm,
um, let's check in with each other. So
mm,
having some compassion, not sort of leaving your partner, abandoning them, like this is an experience you're having, and I'm going to kind of leave you to it, or you don't seem enthusiastic, or you're having a hard time. Instead, like I'm in it with you, and whatever the outcome is in this moment, I promise you, if your partner is anxious and you stay with them and you reassure them when they're having a hard time, even if the sexual part of that experience ends in that moment, you make it more able to come
mm.
back and have another encounter because what you're doing is creating safety. And like we talked about earlier in this conversation, safety is an important foundation for intimacy and pleasure.
I think all you said is so, so true, and I think what resonates with me is I think inherently as humans we have difficulty sitting with hard emotions. We want to fix it. We want to make it right. I find especially this is a generalization, but as a man, I had to learn. My wife was just like, just listen, don't try to fix it, but
Mhm.
to sit with that emotion, to
Yeah.
sit with it and just be supportive and let it be. I think that's very, very powerful. So I think your advice is excellent. I think it's really good. We've had so much good information tonight, and it's like I love this topic because I think all of us can struggle with some anxiety, and all of us think often we're not enough. We
Mhm.
don't get a manual. We don't learn how to be this wonderful, sexual, intimate creature. So we all think. I mean, you look at some people who think they're beautiful, they're perfect, they have whatever you think you should have to be a great sex partner. But
Right.
even that person feels inadequate in
Right.
in so many ways. We all do. So you're not alone in feeling that. But
Absolutely not. Absolutely not alone. And, I'll throw this in as like a little hot tip, which is not just about manage anxiety, create safety, all of that foundational, super, super important. But there was also a research study many, many, many years ago, and they hooked women up to genital sensors and, brain sensors. They showed them disgusting things, gross smells and pictures, and they sort of measured their brain reactions. And then they showed them sexually stimulating materials, and then they showed them the gross things again. And once people were sexually aroused, their reaction to the gross, right, provocative things went way down. And the theory behind that is sex is vulnerable. It's a little bit gross. It's messy, and it's wet and hairy, and right, and all of these things. And so the other thing that I say to people about sex is, of course, start with treating your anxiety. If you have some anxiety, trauma, relationship conflict, all of that. But if you're also in that place where it's almost like, is this anxiety or am I just distracted? Right? Like my thoughts are kind of running, and
I'm thinking of my laundry list of the
yeah.
500 things that I
And
need
that
to
can
do.
turn into maybe I'm anxious and maybe I'm not really here and all of that. So it can be hard to determine which one is happening. I say to people, if you're in that place where it feels comfortable and safe, imagine what it would feel like to just hit the accelerator a little bit on the arousal piece, because we know that, that manager brain that's keeping track of our safety, of our responsibilities, that's where some anxiety can lie, and arousal are like an inverse relationship to one another. And if we're staying vigilant, the arousal doesn't have a chance to build. And so what we're looking for is a way to kind of clock out of our brain and let that arousal experience come up. And so I'll say to people, maybe get out of your routine, or allow your partner to touch you in that way that you think, oh, I was really kind of trying to have a quickie, but I know when this particular thing happens, or when we do it like this, I really kind of get into it. That might allow you to sort of let some of the fearful, anxious, distracting parts of your brain, the volume to turn down on those a little bit. Again, I'd be careful with that. If somebody is anxious, you can't just override anxiety disorder by having more sex, right? More sex toys, more positions, more all of the things. But if you're in that place where, like I said, it feels safe to maybe do that, that's another little strategy to imagine, just kind of, turning the volume down on some of that noise.
Definitely. Well, speaking of which, we're going to talk a little more in a minute, but let's center everybody. It's that time during the podcast. And gosh, everything you said, Alycia, leads beautifully into this. So before we close the episode in just a few minutes, I invite you to take just a moment to come back to yourself, your beautiful, miraculous self. If you feel comfortable, gently place one hand over your heart. Feel the warmth of your own touch. Feel the steady rhythm beneath your palm, the quiet, powerful beat of your life force. Take a slow breath in your nose and exhale softly through your mouth. Let's do that again. Inhale and exhale through your mouth gently, letting go of what you don't need to carry as you exhale. Continue that deep breathing pattern as you ask yourself, what does my body need right now? Just listen. No pressure to fix or change, just simple awareness. Keep that deep breathing pattern in your nose. Exhale through your mouth slowly. And as you continue that deep breathing pattern, remember, you can repeat after me these as well, but remember, I am not broken. I am not broken. Anxiety is a part of the human journey and being human. Anxiety is a part of the human journey. I deserve intimacy that feels safe, connected, and authentic. I deserve intimacy that feels safe, connected, Carry those important messages forward with you. I thank you so much for being here with us. Let's listen to Vic. What's coming up next week on Dr. Jeff Talks About Sex and Intimacy?
Why are minority communities, especially black men, at higher risk for prostate cancer, and what can be done about it? In this important episode, Dr. Jeffrey Albaugh sits down with nationally recognized health disparities researcher Dr. Adam Murphy. Together, they explore the disproportionate impact of prostate cancer on racial and ethnic minority populations. Dr. Murphy shares powerful insights on why early detection and culturally competent care are critical. If you or someone you love has been affected by prostate cancer, or you're committed to equitable health care, this episode is a must-watch. Join us on August 12th at 7 p.m. Central Time to learn more.
Oh, it's been such a great episode, Alycia. Once again, it's always such a pleasure to have you on. You have so many great insights and so much good information to share. And I just thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to enlighten and inform the listeners.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me. It is so important for us to get out and have these conversations and help people know that there are solutions and support for the things that we struggle with.
Definitely. As we finish our night out, Alycia, I'll invite you to as well. If there's some final thing you'd like to leave our listeners with, think about that a second. As I say, you are not alone. Your anxiety is real. What you're feeling is real. And you can't just push it away. We have to acknowledge it and we have to work on it. And despite some of those anxieties and having to be very vulnerable when it comes to love and intimacy, it's a beautiful, miraculous thing to be authentic and real and to be seen and heard by another person, whether showing up in intimacy or sex. And so I hope and pray for you today that you have that special someone that you can do exactly that. Or maybe someone's. All of that's good. Whatever works for you. And also, if not too, some people, it's the intimacy, the connection that's essential and critical, like Alycia was saying earlier. The sex, if you're an asexual person, that's okay too. That doesn't have to be. The connectedness is the part that is that has to be. It's something that each of us human needs. When she was talking about babies die when they don't connect with humans, that's the piece that's critical. The sex part, that's up to you. Alycia, anything you'd like to share with our audiences before we finish?
Just like you said, Jeff, I think it is so great that people show up for these conversations and look for support and healing. It's an oversimplification, but I will tell your listeners what I tell my clients all the time, which is talking is magic. It's an oversimplification of the work that I do, but I think it's an appropriate one. And what I mean by that is we all just need to know that someone else cares about our experience, that can hold it with us. And once we feel less alone, we feel a little bit more connected to the human experience. It opens up a world of possibilities for making change.
Definitely. It's such an honor and a pleasure to do the work we get to do, Alycia and I. You know, you let us into your very private world to help you to have deeper, more loving relationships. And I can't think of any better way to use my life. So thank you for allowing us to be a part of your journey. Thank you so much and have a great evening or day, whatever it is.